Welcome to another episode of Serial Killer Files. I'm your host, Arthur Morgan, and today we're diving deep into one of the most chilling cases in American criminal history. This is the story of how a charming law student's own arrogance became the key to his downfall. This is the hunt for Ted Bundy. Intrigued by the minds behind notorious serial killings and the mysteries that surround them? Scoob, an AI-powered podcast platform, presents Serial Killer Files, a compelling, binge-worthy series that delves into some of history's most chilling crimes. From Charles Manson and Ted Bundy to Richard Ramirez and the East Area Rapist, each episode examines not only the brutal acts, but also the complex psychology, investigative challenges, and systemic oversights that allowed these killers to evade justice. With concise episodes packed with unsettling insights, this series offers more than just true crime stories. It's a forensic exploration of the darkest corners of human behavior. Join over 50,000 true crime fans who rely on Scoob for expertly crafted, thought-provoking content. Download Scoob today and subscribe to Serial Killer Files for the latest episodes on infamous serial killers, unsolved mysteries, and the ongoing quest for answers. Coming back to the Ted Bundy case, let's start with the moment that changed everything. Picture this. October 2nd, 1975. Salt Lake City awakens to a cool, bright morning. In a small room at the Metropolitan Law Building, a young law student named Ted Bundy sits waiting. He's confident, almost cocky. He believes that in just a few hours he'll be walking free, heading back to his classes, his life continuing as if this whole ordeal was just a minor inconvenience. But Detective Jerry Thompson? He's having second thoughts. You see, when Bundy emerged from his holding cell that morning, Thompson couldn't believe his eyes. The man standing before him looked completely different from the suspect they'd arrested weeks earlier. When he came out with his new hairdo, that just blew my mind, Thompson would later recall. Bundy had done something that would become his signature move throughout this entire saga. He'd tried to outsmart the system. Knowing that photographs from his August arrest showed him with a round face and medium-length bushy hair, he'd gotten a strategic haircut. His hair was now trimmed shorter, combed neatly, and parted on the opposite side. He looked markedly different. But here's where Bundy's calculating mind revealed itself in full force. He'd actually planned something even more elaborate. That morning, he'd selected two distinct sets of clothing, one to wear to the courthouse and another layer underneath. His plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Change out of the outer garments just before the lineup, ensuring he looked as different as possible from the other participants. If the witnesses couldn't pick him out, the case would crumble. Yet in a moment that would prove prophetic of his entire downfall, Bundy experienced a last-minute change of heart. He left his second set of clothes at his attorney John O'Connell's office. Was it overconfidence? A moment of doubt? We'll never know. But this decision to abandon his backup plan would be just the first of many times his own ego would sabotage his carefully laid schemes. Thompson, meanwhile, was scrambling. Seeing how different Bundy looked, he quickly replaced the jail inmates originally chosen for the lineup with police officers. The result was what Thompson feared might be too fair. Bundy now looked exactly like the other participants. Thompson turned to County Attorney David Yocom and whispered with genuine concern, "Friend, we are in a world of trouble. Bundy looks exactly like those guys. Our witnesses are going to pick some of those police officers." Little did Thompson know that this moment of panic would soon transform into one of the most crucial victories in the case. The lineup room buzzed with tension. 7 women sat in the audience, each positioned separately between police officers. 3 of them were actual witnesses: Carol DaRonch, Rakelyn Shepard, and Tamara Tingey. The other 4 were county employees, what Detective Thompson called ringers, included for both security and psychological reasons. Thompson had dual motivations for this setup. Both DaRonch and Shepard had expressed genuine fear about being recognized by Bundy or his legal team. Thompson convinced them that their presence would be far less noticeable in a crowded room. Plus, with the press room nearby, there was always the risk that an enterprising journalist might identify DaRonch, who was known to become easily agitated. One wrong comment from her could jeopardize the entire case. For 20 minutes, the 8 men walked across the stage, turning in different directions and reciting 3 specific phrases prompted by Prosecutor Yocom. "Would you like to come to the station with me? Could you come outside and identify a car for me? It'll just take a minute. I'm a police officer. Your car has been broken into." These weren't random phrases. Each one was carefully chosen to echo the words witnesses remembered from their encounters with the suspect. As Bundy spoke, his voice carried that same persuasive tone that had lured so many victims to their fate. When it was over, each woman was instructed to write down the number of any man they recognized. Bundy was number 7. Back in the booking area, the same place where Sergeant Hayward had first processed him 7 weeks earlier, Bundy waited. As time dragged on, his confidence began to waver. Finally, John O'Connell entered with news that would shatter Bundy's world. "Well, Ted," O'Connell said quietly, "this looks like the way it is. You've been identified." The words hit Bundy like a physical blow. He'd arrived that morning fully expecting to resume his classes later that day. Instead, Detective Thompson soon clarified that the charges against him were kidnapping and attempted murder. His bail was set at a staggering $100,000. In that moment, the seemingly impenetrable disguise that Bundy had maintained began to crack. But this was just the beginning, because what happened next would reveal just how dangerous Bundy's greatest weakness truly was: his absolute belief in his own superiority. After being officially processed, Ted Bundy found himself in a compact interview room facing Detective Ben Forbes, Thompson's partner. The plan was simple: let Forbes take the lead with a gentle approach, see what Bundy might reveal. Here's what's crucial to understand about this moment. Bundy had every legal right to remain silent. He could have requested an attorney. Any experienced criminal would have kept their mouth shut. But Ted Bundy wasn't just any criminal. He was a man who believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room. Forbes began with what seemed like a softball question about the handcuffs found in Bundy's car. Now, Bundy had 5 full days to prepare for this question. 5 days to craft a believable story. Instead, he spun a tale so ridiculous it would have been laughable if the circumstances weren't so serious. He claimed he'd found the handcuffs at a garbage dump. His justification? He said that after intervening in a bicycle theft in Seattle, wrestling with the thief until police arrived, he thought having handcuffs might be useful in similar future situations. Think about that logic for a moment. A law student, someone trained in legal reasoning, thought this explanation would satisfy a seasoned detective. It reveals something profound about Bundy's psychology. He wasn't just arrogant. He was fundamentally incapable of understanding how normal people think. Forbes wasn't buying it. While Bundy had proven himself a smooth talker with women who were predisposed to see him favorably, his charm fell flat against a detective approaching his story with professional skepticism. But Bundy kept talking. When Forbes asked about the pantyhose mask found in his car, Bundy claimed he'd been influenced by a film about mountain climbers who used nylon liners beneath their ski masks for warmth. He alleged he planned to use the same concept for his winter law school classes. The rope and torn sheets? According to Bundy, they were for tying oars to his inflatable raft, a gift from his girlfriend Liz. The ice pick was just an ordinary household tool with no sinister purpose. With each answer, Bundy was digging himself deeper. By choosing to speak with Forbes, He'd committed himself to statements that could later be used against him in court. He'd already been caught in one lie during his arrest, and now he was creating an entire web of implausible explanations. Then Forbes delivered the moment that changed everything. My game is homicide. He revealed to Bundy that he was now under suspicion in a kidnapping and attempted murder case, though he carefully withheld Carol DaRonch's name. Caught off guard again, Bundy made perhaps his most damaging decision yet. He agreed to sign a consent form, allowing police to search his room. This single signature opened additional avenues for investigation and potential evidence discovery. What's remarkable is that throughout this entire interview, Bundy seemed to believe he was controlling the conversation. He thought his explanations were clever, his demeanor persuasive. He had no idea that with each word, he was handing prosecutors the rope that would eventually hang him. This pattern, Bundy's fatal overconfidence in his ability to manipulate and deceive, would repeat itself throughout the entire case. Time and again, when silence would have served him better, his ego demanded that he speak. And every time he opened his mouth, he revealed just a little bit more of the monster beneath the charming facade. While Bundy was busy talking himself into deeper trouble, Detective Jerry Thompson was experiencing something that would prove crucial to the entire case: intuition. Thompson was the only person who sensed a connection between the polite law student arrested on that August night and the abduction of Carol DaRonch the previous November. This wasn't the first time Bundy's name had surfaced in connection with murders. Both Seattle and Salt Lake City police had received tips about him before, only to see them fade into obscurity. Thompson himself had actually overlooked a potential connection when King County Police sent over a photograph of Ted from his girlfriend Liz. But this time, something was different. Thompson's suspicions were based purely on instinct at first. Ted Bundy seemed like an improbable suspect, a clean-cut law student with no criminal record. His theory was met with significant skepticism from colleagues, including Sheriff Mac Hawley of Utah County, who was investigating the murder of Laura Amy. Bundy had nothing to do with our case, so forget him. Hawley would snap in frustration whenever Thompson brought up his theory. But Thompson couldn't let it go. He understood that establishing Bundy's guilt hinged on one crucial element: Carol DaRonch's testimony. There were no descriptions of the man seen with Nancy Wilcox in the Volkswagen. Melissa Smith hadn't been spotted with anyone, and without Deborah Kent's body, proving a homicide had even occurred was nearly impossible. This presented a serious problem. 9 months had passed since DaRonch's encounter with Officer Roseland. In that time, she'd been exposed to thousands of mugshots. In police terminology, she might now be a fatigued witness, someone whose memory had been distorted by overexposure to photographs, potentially unable to make a positive identification in court. Before approaching DaRonch, Thompson knew he needed more certainty. He sent Ted's mugshot and photos of items found in his car to Bob Keppel in Seattle. By coincidence, Keppel's team was revisiting potential suspects and had reached number 7 out of 100, Theodore Robert Bundy. Thompson also reached out to Ira Beale in Bountiful, who showed Bundy's mugshot to Raylyn Shepard, the drama teacher at Viewmont High School. Her response was encouraging, but not definitive. If you put a mustache on the individual, I'm sure that's probably him. What kept Thompson focused on Bundy wasn't just physical resemblance, it was behavior. There was an audacity to how Bundy seemed to court police attention, almost as if he wanted to mock and bewilder the detective. Bundy appeared to take pleasure in teasing and frustrating law enforcement. But here's what Bundy failed to understand. His apparent confidence and his fundamental misreading of human emotions were actually tightening the noose around his own neck. Every clever comment, every attempt to seem helpful while remaining evasive, was creating a pattern that Thompson was beginning to recognize. Thompson had encountered plenty of criminals who thought they were smarter than the police. But Bundy was different. He wasn't just trying to avoid capture. He seemed to be enjoying the game. And that enjoyment, that barely concealed arrogance, was what ultimately convinced Thompson he had his man. Looking for an unfiltered look into the minds of history's most infamous serial killers? Scoob goes deeper than the headlines, revealing the complex patterns, warning signs, and unsettling truths behind these predators. Discover how darkness can lurk beneath the most ordinary appearances. Download and listen to Scoob for exclusive stories and insights you won't find anywhere else. Because understanding the hidden signs is the first step to uncovering the truth. Returning to Bundy's case, as evidence mounted against Bundy, investigators across multiple states began to realize they were dealing with something unprecedented. The scope of Bundy's crimes was becoming clear, but building prosecutable cases proved frustratingly difficult. In January, just weeks before the DaRonch trial, a clandestine meeting took place in Salt Lake City. Mike Fisher and Barry Bryant, a prosecutor from Aspen, met with David Yocom, Jerry Thompson, Bob Keppel, and Seattle prosecutor Phil Killian in an unlikely location, a civil defense air raid shelter. Their agenda was crucial. They needed to determine if anyone had a strong enough case to formally indict Ted Bundy on murder charges. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Here was a man they all believed to be a serial killer. Yet after months of investigation, they were struggling to build a single murder case that would stick. David Yocom expressed the frustration they all felt. He was reluctant to proceed with kidnapping charges if there was a possibility of pursuing murder. But despite Bundy's arrest 4 months earlier, Utah investigators had uncovered only one significant new piece of evidence: a pubic hair found in Bundy's Volkswagen that was microscopically similar to Melissa Smith's hair. It wasn't enough for a murder indictment. Bob Keppel and Phil Killian delivered equally disappointing news from Seattle. They'd made no progress toward an indictment and expressed skepticism about ever obtaining one unless Bundy confessed. Mike Fisher had slightly more to work with. From his Colorado investigation, he had a ski brochure from Bundy's apartment, gas card receipts, a hair sample from Corinne Campbell that matched one found in Bundy's car, and a new witness who might place Bundy at the Wildwood Inn shortly before Campbell's disappearance. Fisher and Bryant took this evidence to Judge George Lohr in Aspen. Judge Lohr, known for his profound respect for defendants' rights, remained unconvinced. He declined to authorize either an indictment or an extradition order, stating that Fisher lacked sufficient probable cause to believe Bundy had murdered Corinne Campbell. It was a devastating blow. But Fisher wasn't ready to give up. After the DaRonch trial, the FBI lab provided new ammunition, another hair match linking Carol DaRonch to Bundy's car. A second witness also emerged, claiming to have seen Bundy on crutches in Aspen that spring. Instead of returning to Judge Lohr immediately, Fisher decided to take a significant risk. He would confront Bundy directly, hoping the recent conviction had left him vulnerable enough to reveal something incriminating. Against his attorney John O'Connell's advice, Bundy agreed to meet with Fisher at the prison. Once again, Bundy's ego overruled his common sense. He seemed to believe he could manipulate yet another law enforcement officer. The meeting revealed everything about Bundy's psychological makeup. Had he simply admitted to being in Colorado and provided any alibi, even a fabricated one, he might have frustrated Fisher's efforts. Instead, Bundy continued his pattern of evasive, unconvincing responses. When Fisher asked if he remembered being in Aspen in January 1975, Bundy replied with visible nervousness, I can't say for sure, no." He was literally shaking as he spoke. Fisher noted that Bundy failed to provide any plausible explanation for being in the area. Work, vacation, visiting friends, anything that could have provided reasonable doubt. Instead, his evasiveness only strengthened Fisher's conviction that he had the right man. This pattern would repeat itself throughout Bundy's interactions with law enforcement. Time and again, when a simple, direct answer might have helped his case, his need to feel superior, to engage in psychological games, led him to responses that only increased suspicion. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of all these investigations was how they uncovered the breadth of Bundy's deception. Margaret Maughan, who had known Bundy personally, provided a chilling glimpse into his true nature. Margaret Maughan's testimony provided investigators with perhaps their most disturbing insight into Ted Bundy's psychology. In January 1976, she revealed details of conversations that showed just how far Bundy's facade of normalcy extended and how thin it really was. Margaret had noticed the tear in the back seat of Bundy's Volkswagen with stuffing protruding from it. When she mentioned it, Bundy's response was chillingly calculated. He told her the authorities couldn't implicate him based on the tear because many Volkswagens had similar problems with their back seats. Here was a man already thinking like a suspect, already planning his defenses. But it was Bundy's other revelations to Margaret that truly showed the monster beneath the surface. He told her he didn't recognize any distinction between right and wrong. Even more disturbing, he claimed to have an affinity for virgins, boasting that he could engage in sexual activity with them whenever he desired. Margaret also described disturbing changes to Bundy's car. The front seat was loose, rocking and swaying while driving. Anyone riding in it had to brace themselves constantly. Was this intentional? A way to keep potential victims off balance and vulnerable? Perhaps most revealing was an incident recounted by a Seattle newspaper reporter named Henderson. During a boating trip on a river near Seattle, a girl was floating in an inner tube tethered to their boat. When they hit turbulent waters, Henderson witnessed something that haunted him. Ted's eyes took on a wild expression, and he inexplicably untied the inner tube, leaving the girl adrift. Henderson described Ted's alarming demeanor as he recklessly drove back to Seattle afterward, remaining eerily silent for an hour and a half. It was a glimpse of the real Ted Bundy, not the charming law student, but a man capable of casual cruelty, someone who could abandon a helpless person without a second thought. Even more significantly, Henderson revealed that someone had documented the license plate number from Ted's truck in connection with an abduction case in Oregon. The net was tightening from multiple directions. Margaret's account also revealed Bundy's paranoia and calculated preparations. When he traveled to Colorado, he had someone named Carl Weary monitor his apartment, fearing police intrusion. To secure his living space, Ted had installed a robust lock on the door, screwed the windows shut, and removed the ladder from the window access. She confirmed that Ted had made the journey through Lambs Canyon to Provo in fall 1974 before the snowfall. The timing was crucial. Investigators were trying to establish his presence in Utah during the period when local women began disappearing. What emerges from Margaret's testimony is a portrait of a man living a completely double life. To most people, Ted Bundy appeared to be an ambitious, articulate law student with a bright future. But to those who knew him more intimately, disturbing cracks in his facade were visible. The fact that Bundy shared such revealing details with Margaret suggests something important about his psychology. He couldn't completely suppress his true nature, even when discretion would have served him better. His need to shock, to hint at his superiority, to reveal just enough of his darkness to feel powerful. These compulsions would prove to be his undoing. By the time Bundy's trial preparations began, his ego had reached dangerous proportions. The Chi Omega case was initially scheduled for autumn, but proceedings didn't commence until summer 1979. The delays were primarily due to one factor. Ted Bundy was representing himself. This decision to act as his own attorney wasn't born from financial necessity or distrust of lawyers. It was pure ego. Bundy believed he was not only smarter than any attorney who might represent him, but also more capable of manipulating the legal system to his advantage. Before eventually allowing Mike Minerva to officially defend him, Bundy indulged his distorted sense of self-importance through the deposition process. He summoned numerous law enforcement officers and laboratory technicians for questioning at the jail. But most disturbing of all, he insisted on meeting with the surviving members of the Chi Omega sorority. The authorities had no choice but to comply with his legal right to depose witnesses. Consequently, these young women were summoned one by one to be interrogated by the very man who had brutalized their sorority sisters. They were forced to relive the horrifying experiences of January 15, 1978, answering questions from the person responsible for their trauma. Even Karen Chandler, who had barely survived Bundy's brutal attack, had to endure this psychological torture. Imagine the cruelty of it. A survivor of attempted murder being questioned by her would-be killer, all under the protection of legal procedure. This wasn't just legal strategy. It was sadism dressed up as due process. Bundy was using the very system designed to protect defendants' rights as a weapon to inflict further psychological damage on his victims. When Bundy finally agreed to let Mike Minerva represent him in early 1979, the attorney faced an impossible client. During a visit to the Leon County Jail in March, Minerva delivered some harsh truths that Bundy wasn't prepared to hear. Minerva explained that the statements Bundy had given to Detectives Chapman, Patchen, and Bodiford were tremendously damaging and unlikely to be excluded from trial. He expressed significant doubt about winning the case. Even more challenging for Bundy's ego, Minerva relayed an offer from prosecutor Larry Simpson. There was still a chance to negotiate a life sentence in exchange for a confession, but this opportunity would disappear once the strength of the prosecution's evidence became apparent in upcoming hearings. Bundy's reaction was explosive. He vehemently rejected any suggestion of confession and became infuriated when Minerva implied he wouldn't recommend such a deal unless he believed in Bundy's guilt. For Bundy, guilt was merely a theoretical concept to be debated in courtroom procedures. He expected his legal team to share this perspective without question. The topic wasn't revisited until May 1979, coinciding with Florida's execution of John Spenkelink. The day before that execution, Bundy received a visit from attorney Millard Farmer. Though both Farmer and Minerva declined to comment publicly, according to Bundy, it seemed the Atlanta attorney had made the trip specifically to persuade him to take steps towards saving his own life. Farmer invested extraordinary effort in this endeavor, far more than would be expected from an attorney not directly involved in the case. This suggested a personal motivation, possibly remorse for having failed to assist Bundy during his Colorado proceedings. Perhaps Farmer believed that if Bundy's psychological state had been properly addressed at that time, the subsequent Florida murders might have been prevented. But Bundy remained unmoved. His ego simply wouldn't allow him to admit guilt or accept that he needed saving. Even facing the electric chair, he continued to believe he could outsmart the system. The courtroom cross-examination between Prosecutor Yocom and Ted Bundy provides a masterclass in how overconfidence can destroy a defense. What should have been a routine questioning became a devastating exposure of Bundy's web of lies. The exchange began with those handcuffs found in Bundy's possession. Remember, he told Detective Forbes that elaborate story about restraining a thief in Seattle and deciding handcuffs might be useful in similar future scenarios. Now, under oath and under pressure, that story began to crumble. Yocom zeroed in on a crucial detail. There was no key with the handcuffs. How exactly would these be functional for restraining anyone without a key? Bundy's response revealed everything about his improvisational approach to deception. He suggested the handcuffs were more of an oddity than a practical item, especially since he lacked the key. But Yocom wasn't finished. He pressed Bundy on whether he had specifically told Forbes the handcuffs were intended for restraining people. Instead of providing a straightforward answer, Bundy attempted to divert the conversation. When Yocham repeated his question, Bundy finally admitted he was inclined to respond selectively, essentially confessing under oath that he chose which questions to answer honestly. The prosecutor then moved to another inconsistency. Bundy had never told his attorney, John O'Connell, that he'd smoked marijuana the night of his arrest. When confronted about this omission, Bundy claimed he was too embarrassed to mention it. Here's where Yocham delivered a devastating blow to Bundy's credibility. As a law student, Bundy would know that admitting to marijuana use couldn't be used against him legally. Furthermore, marijuana possession was a minor misdemeanor in Utah, while possession of burglary tools and attempting to evade arrest, the charges he was actually facing, were far more serious offenses. The logic was inescapable. Why would someone be embarrassed about a minor drug offense while facing major felony charges? Unless, of course, they were lying about the real purpose of those burglary tools. Yocham continued his methodical dismantling of Bundy's story, moving to the crowbar found in his vehicle. Bundy tentatively claimed he might have mentioned using it for car repairs, though he couldn't provide any convincing details about its specific use that evening. Throughout this exchange, Bundy's occasional sarcasm and evasive manner only undermined his credibility further. Each attempt at cleverness backfired. Each moment of condescension toward the prosecutor made him appear less sympathetic to the jury. What's remarkable about this cross-examination is how it revealed Bundy's fundamental inability to maintain consistent lies under pressure. He was so accustomed to charming his way out of difficult situations, so confident in his ability to manipulate others, that he never developed the discipline necessary for successful deception in a formal legal setting. The prosecutor's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Let Bundy talk. Give him enough rope, and he would hang himself. And that's exactly what happened. With each evasive answer, each moment of visible nervousness, each contradiction, Bundy was destroying his own defense. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of this testimony wasn't any single lie. It was the pattern it revealed. Here was a man who couldn't give straight answers to simple questions about everyday items found in his car. If he was lying about mundane details, what else was he lying about? By the time Bundy's trial began, the case had become a media sensation, unlike anything the American public had seen before. The selection of the jury alone revealed the challenge of finding impartial observers in a case that had dominated headlines for months. Rudolph E. Tremmel, an engineer who read technical publications like the Platts Oilgram and the Wall Street Journal, was ultimately chosen as jury foreman. The final juror selected was James L. Bennett, a truck driver who, when asked about his awareness of the case, humorously responded that being uninformed would require living in Siberia. His comment captured the reality facing Judge Cowart and the legal teams. Finding truly impartial jurors was nearly impossible. The Bundy case had saturated media coverage for 17 months since the Chi Omega murders. Every potential juror had been exposed to extensive reporting that was heavily anti-Bundy, consistently associating his name with violence and brutality. Judge Cowart, known for his genial manner and frequent biblical references punctuated with "bless your heart," faced the challenge of ensuring a fair trial despite this media saturation. During the week of preliminary hearings, he issued several crucial rulings that would shape the prosecution's case. Prosecutors Larry Simpson and Dan McKeever experienced mixed results in these hearings. They successfully argued for including testimony from Nita Neary, who had encountered an intruder at the Chi Omega house, and secured permission for forensic odontologist Dr. Richard Souveron to present bite mark evidence considered crucial to their case. However, they faced significant setbacks. The statements Bundy had made to Detectives Chapman, Patchen, and Bodiford were ruled inadmissible due to recording malfunctions. McKeever labeled this a major setback, understanding that eyewitness accounts alone might not be sufficient for conviction. Another blow came when Judge Coward excluded the pantyhose mask found in Bundy's car by Utah authorities 3 years earlier. The judge ruled that its speculative nature outweighed its potential relevance. McKeever's frustration was evident as he pointed out the improbability of anyone normally possessing such an item. Despite these obstacles, the prosecution advanced to trial with one significant advantage: a jury that, despite assurances of impartiality, had been influenced by months of anti-Bundy media coverage. The pervasive portrayal consistently linked his name with violence and crime. When the trial began, the jury was confronted with evidence designed to shock and horrify. Graphic color photographs depicted the gruesome crime scenes in devastating detail. Images of Margaret Bowman's severely injured head, Lisa Levy's disfigured wounds, and bite marks on her body created a visceral impact that transcended legal arguments. These disturbing visuals affected the jury profoundly. One juror nearly became physically ill from the descriptions and images. The evidence painted a picture so horrific that it was difficult for any reasonable person to imagine the level of brutality involved. This is where the media coverage became a double-edged sword for the defense. While extensive publicity might typically help an appeal claiming prejudicial coverage, it also meant that Bundy's name and image were already associated in the public mind with monstrous acts. The jury walked into that courtroom with preconceptions that no amount of legal instruction could completely erase. But Bundy, ever confident in his ability to manipulate any situation, seemed to believe he could overcome even this disadvantage. He was about to make a decision that would shock everyone in that courtroom and capture headlines around the world. On February 9th, in the middle of his trial for multiple murders, Ted Bundy orchestrated one of the most bizarre spectacles in American legal history. He got married in the courtroom during his own trial. The event didn't happen by accident. It was the culmination of a carefully planned campaign that began shortly after witness Mary Lynn Hinson's testimony. Ted and Carol Ann Boone had been writing passionate letters to the Orange County Jail chaplain, Reverend Jerry J. Jordan, seeking his blessing for their union. In his letter, Ted conveyed that their decision to marry came after achieving what he called a deep understanding of each other. He expressed admiration for Carol's unwavering commitment to him, describing her affection as both inspiring and calming. The letter painted a picture of a man desperately seeking normalcy and human connection in the face of overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Carol's letter was more reserved, but revealed her own motivations. She emphasized the important role Ted played in her teenage son Jamie's life, describing how Ted actively engaged with and guided the boy. She claimed that formalizing their relationship would bring comfort to all three of them, a desire she said they had both held for a significant time. The jail authorities weren't moved by these romantic appeals. They denied the marriage request, stating it was not in Ted's best interest given his circumstances. After all, here was a man facing 2 death sentences with the possibility of a third. Most rational people would have accepted this decision and moved on. But Carol Ann Boone was not most people. She had made significant personal sacrifices for Ted, uprooting her life and moving to Florida to be near him during his trial. She was determined to legitimize their relationship, regardless of the obstacles. Refusing to accept defeat, Carol obtained a marriage license and underwent the required blood test. When bailiffs initially blocked attempts to collect Ted's blood for testing, Ted successfully appealed to Judge Jopling, arguing he was entitled to meet with a defense consultant. Even facing execution, his legal knowledge and manipulative skills remained sharp. Finding someone to perform the ceremony proved challenging. Florida law allowed notaries public to officiate weddings, but when they approached notary Don Kennedy, he was instructed not to participate. Various alternatives were explored, marrying by telephone, through proxies, but these were ultimately dismissed as legally insufficient. Then Carol had a moment of inspiration that revealed her own cunning. The solution lay in the courtroom itself. While the penalty phase was in session, Ted could act as his own attorney and call her as a witness. Under oath, in front of the judge, jury, attorneys, and gallery full of observers, Carol could affirm her love and desire to marry Ted. If Ted responded with matching sentiments, and if a notary public was present to witness the exchange, their marriage would be legally binding under Florida law. The plan was audacious, romantic, and completely insane, but it was also legally sound. On his wedding day, Ted dressed with particular care, donning a new bow tie, khaki slacks, and his favorite pair of argyle socks. Carol complimented the occasion by borrowing clothing, a black knit top over her white blouse. The courtroom filled with observers who had heard rumors about what was planned. At 10:13 a.m., Ted called Carol to the witness stand. The anticipation among spectators was palpable. Despite an initial misstep where Ted referred to himself as the defendant, the exchange proceeded as planned. Under oath, Carol declared her intention to marry Ted. He reciprocated, stating his desire to marry her. With a supportive notary public in attendance, they had fulfilled Florida's legal requirements for marriage. The moment was surreal. A man facing execution for brutal murders, getting married in the middle of his own trial, using legal procedures designed to ensure justice as the backdrop for personal romance. Even his fellow death row inmates later expressed admiration for the audacity of it all. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of this entire episode wasn't the wedding itself. It was what it showed about Ted Bundy's psychological state. Here was a man so convinced of his own specialness, so unable to accept the reality of his situation, that he believed he could have a normal marriage while facing execution for serial murder. As Ted Bundy's execution date approached, the psychological facade he had maintained for years began to crumble under pressure. The conversations with investigator Hugh revealed a man desperately trying to maintain control while facing the ultimate loss of power, his own death. Hugh's relentless insistence on confronting harsh realities began to unravel the carefully constructed web of justifications Bundy had created. For the first time, real fear began to penetrate Bundy's armor of arrogance. When Hugh mentioned the possibility of electrocution, Bundy momentarily considered negotiating with the governor to delay his fate. Hugh had taken unofficial measures in Tallahassee, suggesting that if Bundy confessed comprehensively to all his murders, assisted in locating the bodies of victims still unaccounted for, and provided psychological insights to experts, there might be room for negotiation. The offer represented Bundy's last chance to potentially save his life. When Hugh returned 3 weeks later with specific details about what might be possible, Bundy's reaction was explosive. "Why would I do that?" he questioned sharply, as if the proposition were absurd. His ego simply couldn't process the idea that he might need to bargain for his life. Hugh reminded Bundy of their previous conversation, where Bundy himself had suggested that his brain was unique and worthy of scientific study. But now, consuming his fourth ham sandwich of the meeting, Bundy shook his head and insisted he never said that and never would. When Hugh produced a tape recording of Bundy's own voice expressing interest in just such a deal, Ted's response was breathtakingly casual. "Well, then I reject it now." He seemed to believe he could simply change his mind about previous statements, as if reality itself was subject to his will. As the execution date drew nearer, Bundy's desperation became more apparent. He attempted to escape Hugh's probing questions by requesting a different investigator through his wife Carol. But he found himself trapped in a web of contradictions and nonsensical statements that he himself had created. By March 1981, the strain had become unbearable, and Bundy declared an end to the interviews. During their final meeting, he maintained his claim of innocence with an almost surreal calmness. "My position on my innocence has been certainly well known," he stated with the same confidence he'd displayed throughout his criminal career. He accused Hugh of falling into the same trap as law enforcement officials who hoped he would eventually confess. When Hugh suggested that confession might lift a psychological burden, Bundy's response was chilling in its detachment. "I carry no burden except being in prison." This final statement revealed everything about Ted Bundy's psychology. Here was a man who had committed acts of unspeakable brutality, destroyed countless lives, caused immeasurable suffering to families and communities, yet claimed to feel no burden beyond the inconvenience of incarceration. Hugh noted that Bundy's ability to compartmentalize his thoughts and emotions was unparalleled in his experience, but on even facing death, even confronted with overwhelming evidence of his guilt, Bundy maintained his psychological defenses with remarkable consistency. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these final interviews wasn't Bundy's continued denials. It was his apparent genuine belief in his own innocence. This wasn't the calculated lying of a criminal trying to avoid consequences. This was the self-deception of a man so fundamentally disconnected from normal human emotion that he couldn't acknowledge the reality of his own actions. Can you really recognize evil when it's smiling at you? Scoob takes you beyond the facade to reveal how charming serial killers like Ted Bundy use charm and intelligence to conceal a horrifying secret. This podcast peels back the layers of deception, exploring how a killer's seemingly ordinary life hid one of the darkest criminal minds in history. Join us as we dissect the crimes, manipulative tactics, and the cultural impact of serial killers like Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, and more, who shattered the notion of what a monster looks like. With chilling insights and detailed storytelling, Scoob offers a sobering look at the dangers lurking beneath a friendly face. Download Scoob now and get a front-row seat to the complex stories of infamous serial killers. Be sure to follow and subscribe to stay updated with the latest episodes and never miss an in-depth exploration of true crime's most evil figures. As we reach the end of this journey through Ted Bundy's capture, trial, and ultimate downfall, one question remains. How did a man capable of such calculated evil ultimately become the architect of his own destruction? The answer lies in the very trait that made him so dangerous: his absolute belief in his own superiority. Time and again, when silence would have served him better, Bundy's ego demanded that he speak. When cooperation might have saved his life, his arrogance demanded defiance. When simple honesty about minor details could have helped his case, his compulsive need to manipulate led to elaborate lies that unraveled under scrutiny. From that first interview with Detective Forbes, where he spun ridiculous stories about handcuffs and pantyhose masks, to his final conversations with Hugh, where he denied ever making statements captured on tape, Bundy was consistently his own worst enemy. His decision to represent himself in court, his insistence on deposing his own victims, his bizarre courtroom wedding, each of these actions revealed a man so disconnected from normal human psychology that he couldn't understand how his behavior appeared to others. Perhaps most telling was his reaction to plea bargain offers that could have saved his life. Even facing execution, he couldn't bring himself to admit guilt, because doing so would have required acknowledging that he wasn't the superior being he believed himself to be. Detective Jerry Thompson's intuition proved correct, but it was Bundy himself who provided the evidence that sealed his fate. His overconfidence led to his downfall, his lies backfired in court, and his ego prevented him from taking the actions that might have saved his life. In the end, Ted Bundy was caught not by superior police work or advanced forensic science, but by his own fundamental inability to remain silent when silence would have served him best. The monster was destroyed by the very traits that made him monstrous: his arrogance, his need for control, and his absolute inability to see himself as anything other than the smartest person in any room. The hunt for Ted Bundy succeeded not because investigators outsmarted him, but because they gave him enough rope to hang himself. And ultimately, that's exactly what he did. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the psychology and capture of one of America's most notorious serial killers. The hunt for Ted Bundy shows us that sometimes evil destroys itself through its own arrogance. Until next time, this has been Criminal Minds Unraveled.